and go.
Okay, so when you are in your mummy's tummy, you start off the size of a full stop, and that full stop stretches and becomes a little bit like a kidney bean. And on that little kidney bean that's you then get 5 buds, and those buds, 2 become arms, 2 become legs, and 1 becomes the brain. So the brain starts to develop at around 3 months old. And the first part of the brain that develops is what we call your primitive brain. Some people call it the monkey brain. Now, the primitive brain is only interested in survival. And I quite like the fact that it creates a little triangle on your palm because it's almost like a hazard. So the triangle, it's interested in your survival. So the primitive brain, sadly, thinks that we are cavemen. Now, in order to eat, we had to hunt our food. And we would also be hunted ourselves. So we would have to be very strong and fight any kind of danger, or we might run away from danger. So the primitive part of the brain, your survival part of your brain, is only interested in you surviving. So it is your fight, flight, freeze, and flop programming. Then when you're born and you're about 11 months or so old, you develop what is called the limbic part of the brain. And the limbic part of the brain is your emotions. So you start to develop your emotional responses. Now, we then have this little chap. And this little chap, it's like the worry monster. I call it the worry monster, but its real name is the amygdala. Now, the amygdala controls your emotions and your fight, flight, freeze, flop response. So most of the time, hopefully, the amygdala is fast asleep and knows that you're in charge and knows that everything's okay. But because of the kind of world we're living in now, often we find our amygdalas are hypervigilant. Now, the amygdala is interested in survival. But after you're about, say, 13, 14 months old, you start to develop your communication skills. You develop your stored memories, and you develop your programming and problem-solving skills, and you develop your communication skills. And this, in effect, is your brain. Now, your brain doesn't stop growing until you are 28 years old. But what scientists have discovered since 2006 is that all the neurons in the brain continue to grow and change. We used to think it was a bit like hard wires in a computer, that it wouldn't change. So we used to think, for example, schizophrenics would stay schizophrenic all their life. We're now realizing that through neuroplasticity and diet, we can actually change the outcome, even for schizophrenics. So your brain is the most powerful, incredible thing. But this is what is called your prefrontal cortex. Now, there's a funny thing that happens with your prefrontal cortex when you are worried, stressed, anxious, afraid, or angry. If you are experiencing any of those emotions, what happens is that your amygdala, boom, has woken up and is in control. So your amygdala believes that you are in some kind of danger. Now, the amygdala doesn't know that we've got Sainsbury's across the road where we can just get our food from. It thinks that we are being hunted or we are going to need to hunt. So the amygdala is in a hyper-vigilant state. Now, when the prefrontal cortex has been unplugged, a bit like when you play a computer game and just the power comes off, then the prefrontal cortex cannot be used. This means that if you are in this hypervigilant state, that you cannot hear as clearly, you can sometimes be up to 60% deaf, you cannot communicate how you are feeling and your problems. And so there are a lot of things that are just not possible to do that you would normally be able to do. So it's really important, because when our amygdala is asleep, we have a lovely calm brain. We can see things clearly, we can problem solve. But when the amygdala is awake, then it is like an internal chaos. And the only thing we can do is try as much as we can to put that amygdala back to sleep, so we can get our communication skills, our problem solving skills, our reasoning and our programming back on track. And one of the best ways to send the amygdala to sleep is to breathe deeply and fully. So you let your shoulders relax, you let your abdominals relax, and as you breathe in really slowly, you're pushing your tummy out and expanding your diaphragm. And as you exhale slowly, you're letting everything sink back and down. And it's good to do this for about 5 breaths. When you're fully aware and you've fully practiced, you can increase this to 10. But you want to be careful not to get too much oxygen too soon, because it can make you dizzy.